She was drawing a salt shaker, not crying, not staring at her phone, not performing the quiet devastation of a woman who has just been abandoned in a restaurant on Abbot Kinney Boulevard in Venice Beach, California. Drawing a salt shaker, the man who left her there, who sent a text from the doorway rather than cross 30 feet of restaurant to say the thing to her face, would spend a long time later trying to understand what he had walked away from. He never fully would. But someone else, sitting 3 tables away with a glass of Napa Cab and a manuscript he had stopped reading 11 minutes ago, understood it immediately. He was already deciding what to do about it. Her name was Sade Gordon, 32 years old, an illustrator who made picture books, not the bright, noisy kind, but the ones with something still and true in them that adults feel without being able to say why. She had been published twice. She was not famous. She did not need to be. She had grown up in Inglewood, the second of 4 children in a loud, large household where the only way to be heard was not to raise your voice, but to make something worth looking at. She had carried this into adulthood. She did not perform. She made. When the world became uncertain, she did not reach for distraction. She reached for her pencil. This is why, on an October evening at Alma Restaurant, 23 minutes into a wait that had just become permanent, Sade Gordon was drawing the salt shaker. The October light was coming through the window at that particular gold angle it only hits in California fall, the kind that makes everything look more significant than it is. She had ordered sparkling water. She had read the menu twice. She had made the decision, on principle, not to check her phone again. And then her phone lit up anyway. Something came up. Really sorry, let's reschedule. She looked at the screen. She looked up. Across the restaurant, in the doorway, she could see him, Caleb Marsh, 34, a UX designer from Culver City, jacket already on, hand already raised in a half wave that was also an apology, that was also a goodbye. He did not cross the room. He did not sit down and explain. He looked at her for exactly 2 seconds, and then he was gone, and the door of Alma swung shut, and the evening continued around her as if nothing had changed. She put her phone face down. She signaled the server. She ordered her dinner, the halibut, a glass of Assertion White, with the calm authority of someone who had decided the evening still belonged to her. Then she looked back at her sketchbook. She kept drawing. Now here is the thing about Caleb Marsh that the narrator wants you to understand. He was not a bad man. He was not calculating or cruel. He had asked Sade to dinner 6 weeks earlier after seeing her illustrations on a mutual friend's feed and being genuinely stopped by them. Small, quiet images of a black girl navigating a very large world. Drawings with the specific quality of something that costs the person who made it. He had been moved for approximately 4 minutes. Then the evening arrived, and Sade was quieter in person than he had imagined. And Caleb was a man who needed a room to return his energy. Sade did not return energy. She absorbed it, transformed it into something private and later, and Caleb could not feel the return. What he felt in its absence was a blankness he interpreted as incompatibility. He thought, standing in that doorway for 2 seconds before he left, "She doesn't even need me here." He was right. But he had mistaken that for an insult, when it was actually the most interesting thing about her. He would not understand this for a long time. 3 tables away, a man named Rowan Callister had already understood it. Rowan Callister was 41 years old. He ran Coastline Books, a small, serious literary press out of a converted Victorian on Echo Park Avenue in Los Angeles. In 12 years, Coastline had published 29 books. 11 of them had gone on to win awards the larger houses then congratulated themselves for supporting. He had a reputation in California's literary world for being direct to the point of social inconvenience. He did not say "not right for us at this time." He said what he actually thought, with the specific, deliberate care of a man who had concluded somewhere in his mid-30s that vagueness was not politeness. It was a way of protecting yourself at someone else's expense. He had been told more than once that he was too much. He had concluded this was only ever true in rooms that could not hold honesty. He had come to Alma that evening for a dinner with a debut novelist whose manuscript he was considering. The novelist had canceled at 6:20, a family emergency, genuine, apologetically texted. Rowan had come anyway. He had ordered the sea bass. He had a glass of Napa Cab and 80 pages of a manuscript about a woman who maps California's eroding coastlines. He had the October light. He had not read a single page, because 11 minutes after he sat down, he had noticed the woman at the window table. Not because of her appearance, though she was striking, because of the sketchbook, because of the way her hand moved, because of the focused, interior stillness of someone who was making something true in the middle of a public room and did not require anyone's permission or attention to do it. He had watched Caleb send the text from the doorway. He had watched Sade's hand slow as her phone vibrated. He had watched her look at the screen, find the empty doorway, look back down. He had watched her order her dinner without a tremor of performance and return to her sketchbook and keep drawing. He set down the manuscript. He was not a man who acted on impulse. He was a man who acted on considered conclusions that sometimes arrive quickly. This one arrived in under a minute. He crossed the restaurant. He stopped beside her table. She looked up. Her eyes were dark and measuring and entirely composed. The eyes of someone who decides, not instinctively, but deliberately, how much of a room to let in. He said, "I saw what happened. I'm not going to make something smaller of it to be polite. That was a careless way to treat someone." She said nothing. She waited. He said, "You draw well. What is that?" She looked at him for a moment, not with suspicion, not with gratitude, but with a quality of attention so clean and direct that he understood immediately she was not a woman who performed reactions. She said, "A salt shaker." He looked at the sketchbook. It was, in fact, an extraordinarily rendered salt shaker, but in the drawing it had taken on a weight and solitude that a salt shaker, by definition, should not possess. It looked like something that had been placed somewhere and quietly forgotten. He said, "It looks like it's been waiting for something." A pause. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in her expression. She said, "Yes." He said, "I'm Rowan. I have a table by the window and a book I haven't been reading. I won't stay if you'd rather I didn't, but I thought you might prefer the alternative to eating alone after something like that." He did not rush her. He made the offer plainly and waited for her to decide. She moved the sketchbook to make room. He sat down. They talked for an hour and 40 minutes. Not the bright, effortful performance of two people on an early date, the curated anecdotes, the carefully chosen opinions, the questions designed less to learn something than to seem like the kind of person who asked them. There was none of that, possibly because they had not arrived here through the ordinary machinery of choice, possibly because Sadie did not perform, and Rowan had long ago stopped. He asked about the sketchbook. She showed him a page near the front, a red-tailed hawk she had watched from the window of her Silver Lake studio that week. Half real and half invented, its feathers rendered with the precision of someone who had looked and then looked again, and then found what she actually saw rather than what she expected to see. He looked at the drawing for a long time. He said, "This is published-level work." She said, "You don't have to say that." He looked at her directly. "I know, I wouldn't." There was a quality to that sentence she filed immediately. Not charm recalibrated to sound like honesty. Just a man stating plainly that his assessments meant what they said. She had been in the California creative industry for 10 years. She had been in rooms full of people who said this is extraordinary the same way they said we should grab coffee sometime, as social currency rather than actual information. This was different. They talked about her work, not her career, her work. The distinction mattered to her, and he seemed to understand it without being told. They talked about a short, devastating novel set in East Los Angeles that they had both read and disagreed about in ways that turned out to be more interesting than agreement would have been. They talked about California, what it gave people and what it quietly required of them in return. By the time the restaurant had thinned to its last few tables, neither of them had noticed the hour. Outside on Abbot Kinney, the October air sat undecided between summer and fall. The street was still lively, someone playing guitar 2 blocks south, the faint salt smell of the Pacific 2 miles west. He said, "I publish illustrated literary fiction, serious work, books for adults who still believe pictures can do what language sometimes cannot. I've been looking for an illustrator for a specific manuscript for 8 months. He described it, a novel about a woman who maps California's eroding coastlines and cannot stop measuring things after her mother dies? Who finds in the precision of her instruments, in the exactness of her coordinates, a way of being present in a world grief has made unnavigable? He reached into his jacket and produced a card. Coastline Books, Echo Park, Los Angeles. He said, "I'm not offering you work at the end of a strange evening. I'm telling you it exists because you should know about it, and because you deserve to leave tonight with something better than what you arrived to." She looked at the card, then at him. She said, "Why are you really telling me this?" He said, "Because the drawing in that sketchbook has the exact emotional register that manuscript needs. And because I have no patience left for watching people with real talent get treated as interchangeable." She took the card. She said, "Thank you, Rowan." He nodded. He walked north on Abbot Kinney. She stood on the pavement holding the card, the October air moving through the street around her, and understood, without being able to say precisely why, that the evening had arrived as one thing and was leaving as something else entirely. She did not yet know what, but the card was in her hand, and she was already thinking about the manuscript. She emailed him on Thursday. 4 days later, 7 sentences, her interest, a request to read the manuscript, and one question at the end. "Is the coastline in the novel based on a specific stretch of California shore?" He replied within the hour. The manuscript was attached. Below it, one line. "The coastline is composite, Point Reyes, Big Sur, the bluffs above Malibu. Take the time you need." She read the manuscript over a weekend. The novel was called Marking the Shore, the story of Iris Navarro, a coastal geomorphologist who measures the rate at which California's cliffs are being taken by the sea, and who cannot stop measuring things after her mother's death. Who finds in the precision of her instruments a way of being present in a world grief has made unnavigable. Sade finished it at 2 in the morning on Sunday and sat at her kitchen table in Silver Lake and did not draw anything. She just sat. This was the highest compliment she knew how to pay a piece of writing, not reaching for the pencil, just sitting with what it had done. In the morning, she emailed one line. "I would like to do this." They met at Coastline Books on a Tuesday afternoon in November. The office was on Echo Park Avenue, a 2-story Victorian that had survived the neighborhood's various reinventions with its bones intact. Books in every room, large windows onto the street, and a 3-year-old Visla named Meridian asleep in the corner, who assessed Sade with the measured calm of an animal who had sat through many editorial meetings and had formed opinions about most of them. She set her portfolio on the work table and opened it. He looked at each piece for the time it required. He did not rush. He did not perform enthusiasm. When he reached the 3 preliminary manuscript sketches she had made after reading, she had not been able to stop herself. He slowed. He said, "These 2 are exactly right." He pointed to a woman on a cliff face with her instruments, the Pacific enormous and indifferent below her, and a kitchen table, a single coffee cup, a folded map, and lights so precise it named the hour without stating it. He pointed to the 3rd sketch, Iris at her mother's gravestone. He said, "This one is technically accomplished, but it's emotionally safe. You solved the visual problem without going into the room where the feeling actually lives." She looked at the drawing. She said, "You're right." He said, "I know. The question is whether you'd already noticed." She said, "I knew something was wrong with it. I couldn't name it yet." He said, "Now you can." She looked at him across the table. There was something clarifying about the way he worked. Not easier, not kinder than others, but cleaner. No residue of agenda. No softening that required later decoding. Just the true thing, stated in the service of the work. She said, "I'll redo it." He said, "Good." Meridian got up, crossed the room, and sat beside Sade. She reached down without looking and scratched behind his ears. "Rowan, watch this." He said, "He doesn't do that with everyone." She said, "Animals know." He said, "So do some people, eventually." She looked up. He was already looking at the next illustration. She filed that sentence where she filed all the others. They worked together through November and into December. A rhythm established itself without discussion, the way rhythms do between 2 people who are both, by nature, more interested in getting things right than in negotiating the terms of getting them right. She sent pages. He responded with notes exact enough to be useful without being so prescriptive they colonized her thinking. She was redrawing the third sketch, Iris at the gravestone, for the second time when she realized she had been approaching it wrong from the beginning. She had been drawing grief, a woman at a grave, in sorrow. What the scene actually required was a woman measuring. Iris would not stand at her mother's grave in open mourning. She would do what she did to every unbearable thing, make it precise. Note the stone's dimensions, its orientation relative to north, the specific quality of December light falling across it. Sade started the drawing over entirely. When she sent it that evening, the email said only, "I found the room." His response came 4 minutes later. "Yes, that's the one. That's the whole book on one page." She read it twice. She put her phone down. She thought about the salt shaker drawing. She thought about what he had said in the restaurant. It looks like it's been waiting for something, and understood, quietly, that he had not been talking only about the drawing. She noticed other things across those weeks. A sequence of small observations accumulating like sediment on the floor of the Pacific, grain by grain, until the shelf is measurably higher than it was. He responded to her work the same way whether it was the best thing she had produced or 2 degrees off. Same quality of attention, same directness. No register shift between praise and criticism. This meant both could be trusted equally, which was its own rare thing. She noticed he did not comment on her appearance. This had always been, in her experience, a tell about where a person's attention actually lived. His lived in the work, and in the ideas around the work, and in what she was actually thinking, not the curated version she had learned to offer rooms that wanted something easier to hold. She noticed he had started leaving a spare coffee mug on the work table when she came to the office. Just a second mug. No ceremony. She poured her own coffee without comment, and he did not mention it either. That small, unmade decision, the mug simply appearing, simply being used, lodged somewhere in her chest she was not ready to name. She noticed most significantly that when she said the half-true version of something, he waited. He never demanded the fuller version. He simply made it clear, through the quality of his patience, that he was there for it if she arrived. She had not known this was something she needed until she experienced its absence in every other room she had ever been in. In January, Caleb sent another message. He had seen a page from her picture book shared on someone's feed. A small girl standing in the ocean up to her shins, looking at the horizon with an expression that was not fear and not wonder, but something that lived precisely between them. He said it was beautiful. He said he had been too hasty. Sade read the message on a Tuesday morning at the coastline work table, a cup of coffee in her hand, the manuscript spread before her. She thought about it for 30 seconds. She wrote back, "I hope you're well, Caleb." She put her phone face down and picked up her pencil. The message produced not anger, not satisfaction, not grief. It produced a completeness of indifference that was almost like information, as though her interior had already reorganized itself around something more true, and the old arrangement had left no forwarding address. She did not mention it to Rowan. There was nothing to mention. The book was nearly finished the evening everything changed. February. The final illustration, Iris standing on a California bluff at dusk, the Pacific going dark below her, the measurements done, the instruments put away. Just a woman and a coastline, and the specific quality of an ending that is also a beginning. Sade had painted 4 versions. None of them had been right. She brought the 5th to Echo Park that evening and unrolled it on the work table. Rowan looked at it for a long time. Longer than usual. He said, "This is it." She exhaled something she had been holding for 3 days. He said, "What changed?" She said, "The previous 4 were all about the ending. This one is about what comes after." Iris isn't looking at what she's losing. She's looking at what the measurements will never capture. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's how you hold things, isn't it? Not quite a question." She looked at him. He said, "The difficult things, they don't live on the surface of your work. They live underneath it, in the structural decisions, what you include, what you leave negative space around, where you put the weight. You don't illustrate the feeling. You build a space that the feeling inhabits." The room was very still. She said, "Most people don't see that." He said, I saw it in the salt shaker. Something moved through the room that had not been in it before. Not dramatically, more like a frequency shifting. Same room, same two people, same work table between them, but everything slightly altered in its meaning. She said, I came here because of a manuscript. He said, I know. She said, this isn't only about the manuscript anymore. He said, I know that too. She said, I don't move quickly on things like this. I watch for a long time before I decide. It's not fear, it's the way I work. He said, I know how you work. I've been watching you work for 4 months. She looked at him for a long moment. She said, then you know I'll get there. He said, I know, not a declaration, not a scene from a film, just two precise people being precise about something true. No translation required. She rolled the illustration into its tube. She said goodnight to Meridian. She left. She drove home through the Los Angeles dark, the 101 West, the Silver Lake exit. The city spread in every direction and sat with the conversation the way she sat with manuscripts that stopped her. Not analyzing, just letting it settle into its true shape. But here is what the narrator has been waiting to tell you. Here is the thing underneath the story you thought you were watching. Because this is not, at its core, a love story, though it becomes one. It is a story about what happens to a piece of work when the wrong hands reach for it. And it begins with an email Rowan received on a Thursday morning in February, the same week the final illustration was finished, the same week the manuscript was being prepared for the printer. The email was from a woman named Priya Anand, Senior Acquisitions Editor at Meridian House, one of the 5 largest publishing conglomerates in the United States. 4 sentences. We have heard extraordinary things about Marking the Shore. We would like to discuss acquiring paperback rights for national distribution. We believe we can offer something Coastline Books cannot. I'd appreciate a conversation at your earliest convenience. Rowan read it twice. He put the phone down and looked out the window at Echo Park Avenue and went very still. The problem was not the offer. The problem was that Meridian House did not approach small California presses out of literary generosity. They approached when they had specific, sourced intelligence that a book was generating pre-publication attention. And the only people outside Coastline who had read Marking the Shore were Laura Smith, the novelist, and one other person, a literary journalist named Derek Fontaine, to whom Rowan had sent an early reader copy 3 weeks ago as a professional courtesy. A courtesy he was now sitting in his Echo Park office, regretting with the cold, specific fury of a man who does not permit himself to be careless twice. He called Derek. Derek picked up on the second ring. Rowan said, "Did you tell Meridian House about the Smith manuscript?" A pause. Rowan, yes or no. Another pause. Longer. They offered me a column, a real one. They asked what was worth paying attention to, and I, Rowan, said, "You gave them a manuscript that belongs to someone else to get yourself a column. I didn't give them anything. You mentioned enough." He ended the call. He sat at his desk and thought about Laura Smith, who had waited 4 years to publish this novel, who had chosen Coastline not for the money. There was never much money at Coastline, but because of what Rowan had told her at their first meeting. "I will treat your book the way it deserves to be treated. Every decision will be in service of the work." He thought about Sade, whose illustrations were now inextricably woven into the text, not decorative, but structural, not separable from the novel without damaging both. And he thought about what Meridian House would do with it. They would offer Laura a number difficult to refuse. They would publish it well in the visible ways, clean design, national distribution, review attention, a marketing budget Coastline would never have. And then, with the best corporate intentions, they would sand down the very edges that made it extraordinary. They would have opinions about the title, the cover, the pacing of the release. They would eventually have opinions about the illustrations. He had a decision to make. But it was not his decision alone. He called Laura first. Laura was in Monterey, where she had grown up and where the book was partly set. She listened to everything. She was quiet for a long moment. She said, "What do you think they'll do with Sade's illustrations?" He said, "They'll have opinions." She said, "Rowan, those illustrations are not decorative." He said, "I know. She said, "What do you want to do?" He said, "I want to tell you what I believe is true, that this book as it exists right now, your text and Sade's illustrations as a single unified object, is complete. Why distribution would be wonderful. And the cost of it might be the thing that makes the book worth distributing." He paused. "But it is your book, and I will support whatever you decide." Laura was quiet for a long time. She said, "Send me the email." He sent it. He waited. He did not call Saad that day, understanding, with the specific, painful clarity of a man who had built a career on saying the true thing, that this was the moment where what he wanted and what was right for someone else might not be the same thing. The only honest choice was to stay out of the space between Laura and her decision. He went home to his Echo Park apartment. He poured a glass of water. He did not drink it. He sat with the stillness of a man who had done what he could and now had to wait. Sade called the following morning. Laura had called her first. Her voice had a quality Rowan had not heard in it before, not anger, not fear, but a quiet, concentrated charge, like a circuit that had just been completed. She said, "Laura told me." He said, "I know." She said, "She wanted to know what I thought." He said, "What do you think?" A pause. She said, "I think the book is already what it needs to be. I think the illustrations are not decorative." She stopped. "I think I'm not asking the right question." He said, "What's the right question?" She said, "Why you didn't call me first?" The line went quiet. He said, "Because the book is Laura's, and because I didn't want my judgment contaminated by wanting to protect something that is also yours." A silence that held more than words were equipped to carry. She said, "That is the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me about my work." He said, "It's what was true." She said, "I know." A breath. "I told Laura to stay with Coastline. I told her the book existed as a whole thing, and handing pieces of it to people who would optimize each piece separately was a way of making more of something while making it less of itself." She agreed. He said, "Sade, you didn't have to do that." She said, "I know." Silence. Then, "Rowan, I drew something I want to show you, not as work." His voice when he answered was steady, but she had spent 4 months learning to hear what lived underneath his steadiness. He said, "When?" She said, "Tonight, if you're free." He said, "I'm free." She showed him the drawing. Near the front of the sketchbook, between two studies of hawks and a drawing of a Silver Lake rooftop at dusk. Two people at a restaurant table. The light was the specific gold of an October evening on Abbot Kinney Boulevard. One figure was a woman with a sketchbook open in front of her. One was a man who had just sat down. He was not looking at the menu. He was not looking at the room. He was looking at the woman across from him with an expression the artist had rendered with the same precise, unflinching care she brought to every true thing. He was paying attention. Rowan looked at the drawing for a long time. He said, "When did you make this?" She said, "The night you walked over. I drew it when I got home. I didn't know what it was yet. I just knew it was something I needed to keep." He looked at her. He said, "You drew what happened before you knew what it meant." She said, "That's how I work." He said, "I know." He handed the sketchbook back. He said nothing for a moment, not from uncertainty, but from the specific fullness of a man who has arrived somewhere he has been moving toward without knowing it, and requires a moment to simply be present in it. Then he said, "Can I stay for a while?" She said, "Yes." About Caleb Marsh. He never heard the name marking the shore. He did not attend the publication party at Coastline Books in March, where Laura Smith read from the novel and people stood against the walls because every chair was full. He did not see the reviews that arrived slowly and then all at once. The piece in The Believer, the essay in a California literary journal that called the illustrations the most emotionally precise visual work published alongside fiction in the last decade. Months later, he was walking on Abbot Kinney when he stopped at a bookstore window. The same street, the same October to now distance. On display in the window was a book. The cover image stopped him. A woman on a California bluff at dusk, the Pacific dark below her. Something in the quality of the light that he could not name. Something patient and undefeated and entirely sure of itself. He looked at the author's name. He looked at the illustrator's name. Illustrations by Sade Gordon. He stood very still on the pavement. He thought about the restaurant, about the text sent from a doorway, about a woman drawing alone at a window table who did not cry, did not perform, did not need him there. He understood, standing at that window, that he had been in the same room as something extraordinary and had looked at it for 2 seconds and chosen to leave. He did not buy the book. He walked away. And that is the most complete form of regret. Not the sharp, sudden kind. The kind that arrives years later in a bookstore window, in a quality of light you do not have the language to name. The slow, settling understanding that you were once close enough to touch something rare and called it nothing and left. The last image, a Sunday in April. Sade's Silver Lake studio. The light at that hour is the color of the inside of a peach, warm and specific and unambiguously Californian. She is at her drawing table working on something new, a picture book about a girl who learns to read tide charts with her grandfather in Morro Bay. It is the best thing she has made. Rowan is in the chair behind her, reading a manuscript. Meridian is asleep on the floor, taking up more room than is strictly necessary. She stops drawing. Without turning around, she says, "Do you want to see what I'm working on?" She has never done this before. She shows work when it is finished. This is the first time she has offered the unfinished thing. He sets the manuscript down. He crosses the room. He stands beside her and looks. He says nothing for a long time. He says, "The grandfather's hands. The way you've drawn them. They look like they know something." She says, "That's what I was trying to make." He says, "You got it." She goes back to drawing. He stays beside her, present, unhurried, watching her hands move the way he watched them for the first time in a Venice Beach restaurant on an October evening, before she knew he was looking. The studio holds them in the particular silence of two people who arrived at each other by accident and stayed by choice. The Vizsla shifts on the floor and resettles with the deep contentment of an animal who has correctly assessed the room. The city hums somewhere below the Silver Lake hillside. The California light does what it does in April, makes everything look like it has been waiting to be exactly this, in exactly this moment, for longer than anyone could have planned or honestly claimed they deserved. The narrator closes here, not with a lesson, with an image. A woman making something true, a man paying attention, a sketchbook open on the table between them, turned to a drawing of two people in a restaurant, the original evening, preserved in pencil, the moment before the rest of the story knew what it was. Some people look at you and see what is convenient. Some people look at you and see what is actual. The distance between those two things is not always visible from across a room, but it is always visible in the work. It is always visible in what you choose to keep. If this story resonates with you, kindly like, subscribe, and share it with someone who makes things and deserves to be truly seen. Thank you for watching.